Hey, welcome to Epiglogue. Today, Russell and I get to sit down and talk about the concept of Sabbath rest. He spoke on that on Sunday, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper and answer questions about the Sabbath day, and is that command still in effect today, and what does a principle of Sabbath rest actually look like? And so I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. All right, Russell, before we jumped on here, you and I were talking about something you're doing this weekend. You want to share with the good people watching what's happening in your life this weekend?
Yeah. My family is from East Texas,
Yes.
Upshur County, and in Upshur County, they celebrate the yam. And so
one does.
Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
Especially in the fall. And you don't get the yam confused with a sweet potato. It is a yam. And we're going to go celebrate the Jamboree.
The Jamboree. I like this,
It's a
man.
Jamboree. It's downtown Gilmer.
What kind of things happen at a Jamboree?
There is, obviously there's like a show, a rodeo, not a rodeo, but, show animals, the ag, they've been building stuff all year. You can bid on that stuff. There's art. There's a yam pie contest.
Oh, are you going to eat a yam pie?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
There's, the carnival rides downtown. There's funnel cakes. There's corn dogs.
Alligator on a stick, maybe?
Turkey legs.
Okay, turkey legs.
Turkey legs. There's two parades.
Okay.
There's going to be the parade Friday morning, and then there's the Queen's Parade because there's a yam queen. And I've had multiple cousins who are yam queens.
Wow.
And,
Except for the yam queen.
What an honor.
It's pretty cool.
Is there a yam king?
No yam kings. It's,
Okay.
we don't think a whole lot of the fellows in this deal.
I gotcha.
But it's a big deal. We're gonna go. We haven't been in a while.
Yeah.
So Saturday morning you'll be like, I wonder what Russell's doing. I'm watching.
Can you describe the
Jamboree.
smell at the Jamboree?
Yes.
It is a lot of grease.
Okay.
A lot of smoke from smokers, barbecue, turkey legs.
But is there a yam scent in the air?
When you go to the show barn,
Okay.
where the yam pie contest will be, I don't know, 40, 50 pies entered in, and it's fantastic.
I would imagine as well there's a lot of yam puns happening.
A lot of yams and puns,
Yes.
and you can imagine. It's a unique experience that, there are some people that I am pretty well convinced that when I walk the downtown square in Gilmer that come out in public once a year, and it is for the Jamboree.
Man.
And then they go back into hiding, and they'll come back out again.
What a great experience.
It's a fantastic experience. I think everybody ought to go check out a Jamboree or a fire ant festival or an okra strut or whatever it is. Those are great things to do.
I'm also East Texas Fire Ant Festival. That's what we did in Marshall.
Yeah.
There was a fire ant calling contest. So you'd see which fire ant came to you when you called it, and you had to call it in an ant voice.
Wow.
Is there anything like that at the Yam Festival?
No.
Okay.
No.
I mean, I would have hoped.
No yam whispering or
No
anything.
yam whispering.
You do decorate yams, so the elementary schoolers get a yam and they decorate it. They
like a
paint
Mr.
it.
Potato Head type thing?
Yeah.
Or? Okay.
And then you judge it. Like,
Okay.
Wow, that yam looks like a whale, or that yam looks like a
I'd
minion.
I would like Sunday morning to see a picture of the yam that you decorated on that screen.
Yeah, I personally won't be decorating yam, but I could take a picture of mini yams that have been painted.
Okay. Mini yams
by East Texas elementary school students.
Yeah, man, you're talking about beauty this
On
weekend,
Sunday.
and I think that's your illustration right there.
Man has been called to have rule and dominion.
Yeah,
and one way we have shown dominion is by painting yams.
Painting the yams at the Jamboree.
Yeah.
All right, man. That sounds fantastic, by the way.
It's going to be great. I can't wait. I know it sounds corny, but we love to be there. So,
very fun, man.
Doesn't sound corny at all.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it sounds yammy.
Yammy.
I think that's where we need to stop. Anyways. That's amazing. Okay. All right. Well, on Sunday, you talked about Sabbath rest. Obviously, we're in the book of Genesis, the seventh day. God rested, and And so really drawing out this Sabbath principle.
Yeah.
Our service looked a little different. It was a little more restful, just kind of took moments to pause and worship and reflect. You led a guided prayer time just for us to just sit with the Lord. Really, I enjoyed that. I thought it was different and kind of slowed down that pace of life that we're always often wrestling with. And so, thanks for teaching on that on Sunday and leading us through that. I thought it was really, really helpful.
Yeah,
And,
thank you for the team clearing the stage and helping create that environment. I agree. I thought it was well received, and as we talked on Monday, maybe something we ought to do every once in a while.
Yeah, I'd love it, man. It's fun, and can't go wrong with a cello.
No,
man, that speaks to my soul. There's nothing more restful than cello music for me. But anyway, so I think it's a question that's come up in my small group. I think you mentioned you've had a few questions about Sabbath, Sabbath rest, and this idea of like, in the Bible, obviously, like you referenced, is it Exodus 20? Is it?
Yep, Exodus 20. Yep, that's the fourth commandment.
The fourth commandment of keep the Sabbath and keep it holy. And so naturally the question comes up when it comes to Sabbath, like, are we supposed to keep the Sabbath day?
Yeah.
Right. Is that fourth commandment still in effect today? Do we need to keep the Sabbath day as a day of rest, and what does that look like? So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. We can dialogue about that some, but I imagine there's some folks wondering that same thing. So,
yes, we and it's a really big, broad conversation that we won't be able to cover all of it.
Come on,
exactly. A lot of the question is because you get something like the Ten Commandments, which are incredibly important. They have some truths that they transcend Old Testament, New Testament, whatever.
It's called holy, righteous, and good. I mean, these the scriptures, it is a good thing, right?
Absolutely. And so we get them, and then we try to figure out in the New Testament, how do they apply? And many of them are repeated, and we know that, I mean, obviously murder and stealing and lying, like all of those things are clearly condemned in the New Testament. But then you get something like the Sabbath, which we don't have commanded to do again.
Right.
And then you have Jesus, who seemingly is breaking all the rules that are surrounded they surrounded Sabbath with. And so we get these weird questions of, man, how does the Old Testament really relate to the New Testament? That's what we're asking. What's the continuity between the testaments? And should we keep Sabbath? And the hard part about that is by the time you get to the New Testament, Sabbath had changed from a day of rest, no work, to going to synagogue and listening to scripture reading. And then when you combine that with the early Christian church, who was going to celebrate the risen Savior on Lord's Day, it's like, hey, well, let's combine some of those things together. And we end up with Sabbath, Lord's Day, but Sabbath day wasn't Sunday. It was the seventh day, which was Friday night to Saturday night.
Yes.
And so then we just have to figure out, man, is going to church on Sunday Sabbath day?
Yeah.
I guess it could be. Are we supposed to not do anything on Saturday? And then is this really more of a principle than it is a command?
Or an actual entire day.
An entire day, yeah. And so you look at it, and to me, what's curious about things like Sabbath, when you find these principles, they're pre-law. So they clearly have some sort of standing that is really important, because they're not just something that we find in the law given to Israel. This is God doing something, and then we follow his lead because he did it. And I think we can make a pretty strong argument that Jesus rested really well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
regular rhythms of rest for him. I mean, you see him going into the crowds, and then he retreats and he rests and he goes, And
So I think
Yeah.
for us at Faith Bible Church, we would say that Sabbath is a principle
Yeah.
that we ought to figure out, like you say, rhythms of rest
Yeah.
where we restore, replenish our heart,
Mm.
mind, body, soul. I don't think we would say you have to earmark an entire day to it,
Yeah.
but there ought to be a rhythm that's regular and routine.
Yes.
And we wouldn't call Sunday morning Sabbath day.
Right.
We would call it Lord's Day, the
Yeah.
day we celebrate the risen Savior, and we do the things the early church did
Yeah.
2,000 years ago.
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, when you think about it that way, like even on a Sunday morning, like man, our corporate gatherings, like even from a biblical standpoint, like that's not just a place to come and show up and rest. It's actually a place to serve and like serve others, right? So you're actually working in that sense,
Yeah.
but it's like,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it is. But you talked about that conflation of, it's at some point we shifted this thinking in Christianity to Sabbath being that Sunday, and church is part of that, and
Yeah.
it's not necessarily like just from in terms of the biblical principle and rhythms.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated Sunday how you use that word Sabbath principle, right? And
Yeah.
just to talk about it because it gets tricky. I had somebody recently ask
Yeah.
me similar question: what is your day of rest? And I was like, well, I don't actually have a full day of rest. Like
Yeah.
I try to find pockets of rest throughout
Yeah.
the week, which is that Sabbath principle of
Sure.
intentional rest, which is what you described on Sunday. So,
And somebody who might say, "Hey, I'm going to give 24 hours
Yeah.
to rest." That's great.
that's awesome. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that.
No, nothing
Yeah.
wrong with it at all. But we would also say, hey, just like Jesus would get away for a couple of hours and pray, or maybe an evening.
That's right.
And all of those things are that Sabbath rest. When you think about for the church, man, that conflation between Sunday morning and Sabbath, we do that with a lot of stuff. We do it
Absolutely.
with tithing and generosity. We do it with the house of the Lord. Like the church is this special temple building. And I mean, we do it. We just kind of mix these things.
Yeah.
And I think the heart behind all of it, like nobody was trying to create a lot of chaos and confusion. It just, it ended up being, we tied them together, and now it has created some confusion. We need to go back and untangle a little bit.
Well, and it's, I mean, you think about Jesus, like even, we were talking about different gospels, but book of Matthew, and right, you've got the first half of Matthew, and it's this, much of it is the Sermon on the Mount, and he's kind of reteaching the law and going to the spirit of it, the heart of it. Like you talked about earlier, like it's not about just not murdering. It's like, well, do you have hatred in your heart and I think it's similar with Sabbath, right? It's not just about keeping a day. It's about actually resting and trusting the Lord and that sort of thing. And so then when you get to Matthew 12, after he's been kind of talking about the heart and the spirit of the law, right? It's not just about doing these requirements, it's your heart. And then Matthew 12, you see him, is it Matthew 12, plucking grains on the Sabbath, healing on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And he's challenging, he's actually practicing what he preached. Like it's not about the legalistic day or the and the Pharisees really struggled with that. And I think that'd be an interesting thing to talk about, is actually Jesus healing on the Sabbath and his disciples plucking heads of grain on the Sabbath, and
because they were hungry.
Yeah. And so maybe we could talk about that a little bit. Mark 2 handles it really well, but it's this.
So I guess the Sabbath, it is one of the clear markers for the nation of Israel in the Old Testament.
Absolutely.
I mean, it really, I mean, there were a lot of things that they did that was very different. But Sabbath, taking that day, not working, you can find it all throughout the Old Testament where the other nations couldn't understand it. It was very different than the other nations. Matter of fact, Nehemiah had to deal with it because they were showing up on Sabbath, ready to sell. I mean, it was constant. And when you think about the punishment and the exile for the nation of Israel because they didn't keep the covenant. It was based off of you didn't keep this seventh year rest, and
That's
so
right.
you're going to be in captivity for 70 years. Like
Yeah.
so, this failure to keep the Sabbath was very pronounced and well documented. So then you get the Pharisees, who I think again, best intentions are we're going to keep this thing now.
Well,
And we're going to surround it with a bunch of rules and regulations
That's
to
right.
keep us from not doing what got us in trouble the last time.
yes. And you think about where the Pharisees came out of. It was that 400-year period of no prophets, God's not speaking anymore, and all these nations are invading. And so the religious zealots are trying to preserve their heritage and these practices so they don't get in trouble again. Like,
That's right.
And so and the Pharisees come out of that and they're like, no way that we are giving up the Sabbath or
That's
flexing on this. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So when you put all of that, and then Jesus enters the scene, and he's trying to get to the heart of it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this command has been so buried in every external rule and regulation you can imagine. And then he heals somebody, which in and of itself is crazy.
Yeah.
But that he did it on a Sabbath, and there were two things they couldn't compute, which was, wow, somebody just got healed. And then not only that, but it happened on a day that we shouldn't be working. And is healing working? I guess it is.
Yeah.
We're confused. Jesus, we don't like you.
Yeah. It's just, how dare you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Mark 2, I'll read it. This is, to me, this statement that Jesus makes about the Sabbath gives complete clarity to it. So verse 23, it says, "And it happened that he was passing through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples began to make their way along while picking heads of grain." So you can imagine just running their hands through there, grabbing some grain, thrashing it in their hand, and then just going to pop it in their mouth.
Yeah.
The Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Which was to do some sort of work, right? Harvesting, which...
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about parsing.
They're just having
that
a little
out.
snack, man.
Yeah.
It's
We don't have, some massive tool instrument. We're not giving the day. We're just getting a little grain, right?
exactly. It's like cereal. It's
Exactly. So, and he said to them, "Have you never read that David, when he was in need and when his companions became hungry, how he had entered the house of God at the time of Abiathar the high priest and ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except the priest? And he also gave it to those who were with him." So Jesus takes this Old Testament story, which is great. David's running from Saul. They get there to the temple, and he's like, "Hey, I need something to eat." And the priest gives him this showbread, right? And so they're not going to argue with David,
right.
because David's the man.
It's like, if David did it,
So if David can bend the rules on the law, and the reason he could bend the rules on the law was because David, who was a man after God's own heart, the promised king, if he was hungry and his men were hungry, I think it's going to be okay for him to have a little meal here that typically wouldn't be used for that. But the heart of it was, let's take care of this guy.
That's right.
So Jesus then said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath." So this idea that, man, this we're not here just to make this day holy, even though we are to do that.
Yeah.
But there is a piece that the Sabbath is for us. It's for us to rest. It's for us to be renewed and replenished. And so he's trying, as you said earlier, to get to the heart of it. And man, it's super hard when we cover it up with so many rules and regulations, even if the heart of all those rules and regulations were good.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. It's even interesting now. I mean, if like you go to Israel today, and man, you hit Friday night, and it's a beautiful thing. Just even culturally, like, man, like Sea of Galilee, man, like tons of people come out. The hotels get full because people are just coming with their families to rest, eat some good food, just enjoy stopping at the end of the week and just resting.
Yeah.
But then, like, if you're staying in those hotels and like you're on the 8th floor and you're coming in from the street, you get on the elevator
every floor.
And it stops at every floor because pushing that button is work, and you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath.
So just say that again. Pushing a button is considered work.
Exactly. And so, all these rules and regulations around what constitutes work, and you pile on tons of things like can you use your appliances in your house on that day? And
they have Sabbath mode.
Yeah, exactly. There's Sabbath modes on refrigerators and all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
And so it's just interesting how even today you go over there and you feel it, man. You just feel it. And when you're staying at a hotel or just walking around the city and in different ways. And so it's still, I mean, and a lot of people that even kind of follow that aren't even religious necessarily. It's just become so ingrained.
Sure.
And so it's very interesting. And it's like, is that really the heart of what God was talking about with the Sabbath and what Jesus came to kind of teach the heart of?
Yeah.
And so his words, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. You actually Sunday you referenced this big red book that you got here, John Mark Comer, Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Talk a little bit about like what do you love about that book? How'd you come across that book? What's it meant to you?
Yeah, so John Mark Comer, this book, I don't want to misspeak. I'm pretty sure it was nationwide bestseller in and outside of Christendom. So like it hit mainstream. I knew some guys that were reading it just for other reasons. So
which tells you something about our culture, right? You get a title like that and people go, I need that, right?
Yeah. So I read it. I actually really appreciate the way he writes, the way he thinks. And to be honest with you, I'm a little jealous. I don't think that way. My mind doesn't process that way. So it's super cool when you get a guy who's really smart but has I don't even really know how to describe it. An artistic, a very
he's a great writer.
Yeah, he's a great writer, and so I read it. I thought it was good. Matter of fact, I would love to use the content as a sermon series sometime to talk about simplicity and solitude and slowing down and obviously when I knew I was going to get to the seventh day, I picked up this book and there were so many quotes that I couldn't even use them and really couldn't even talk about a lot of what he said. But I thought there were a few that if I could have gotten to, they would have been fun. Obviously you just don't have time. A couple of them, if you don't mind, I'll share a few
I
of
love
them.
it, man.
One of the things he talks about is the reason we don't slow down, and the idea that we feel like we never have enough. So he talks about the twin gods of accumulation and accomplishment.
Yeah.
I really thought that was pretty good for those of us who struggle with working, not slowing down, because there's always something to accumulate or there's always something to accomplish.
Yep.
So
and another point, and on the accumulation note, he says that shopping is now the #1 leisure activity in America.
Yeah.
So it's like we love to accumulate stuff. We love to fill our lives with stuff. We love to, but in order to have the money to do that, you got to accomplish something. It's like
it's a never-ending cycle.
Yeah, you see how those two fit together. But
I rest by shopping, so I need to work more to get more money. So
exactly.
So
I can enjoy life and stuff. And
crazy.
Yeah.
He has a list that he calls restfulness and then restlessness. And I really wanted to, if I had more time, I would have probably put this chart, especially toward the tail end, to think about, are we being restful? Are we being restless? I'll just go over a few of them. He talks about margin versus busyness, slowness versus hurry. Obviously, that's part of it. Quiet versus noise. In our small group, we talked about that sometimes we think we're resting, but we're scrolling through social media, and or even news. And while there might not be much outward noise, we're creating an inward noise. So it's still not being quiet.
Yeah.
I just thought, man, when the small group we were talking about that, I was like, man, that's really
It's convicting.
good. Yeah.
I mean,
Time alone versus crowds. Sometimes we think, hey, I'm gonna rest by going to a concert or whatever, and man, you get in this crowd and it's anyway.
It's enjoyable, but is it restful?
Yeah. Contentment versus discontentment. That one obviously is good. The last two I thought were good. Working as contribution, and then work as accumulation and accomplishment, which we had just talked about, but like working to contribute, to add, not just so that I can get more.
Yeah.
And then working from love instead of working for love.
Yeah.
It's like, man, those last two were pretty, just personally thinking, man, why do I do what I do? So,
well, and that ties into what we've been talking about, image of God being created to cultivate and do something worthwhile with the world God has made. We're His imagers, and it's and we find purpose in that, right?
Yeah,
not just working to accumulate more stuff, but
he had a quote in here from Walter Brueggemann, who says, "People who keep Sabbath live all 7 days differently." Anyway, I was like, man, I wonder, especially with the nation of Israel, because they would have been so different. I just curious, like for myself and for the church, do people see us live our 7 days a week differently? Which made me think of some modern examples, which, a lot of people highlight, but, Chick-fil-A, closed on Sunday, honoring that principle for multiple reasons. Truett Cathy said he made a piece of that whole restaurant chain, that culture of we're just gonna do 6 days here.
Yeah.
And you can't argue with the success.
No joke, man. I mean,
isn't that crazy?
And I always want Chick-fil-A more on Monday when it's closed on Sundays.
Yeah.
It's a great business model too.
Yeah.
Anyway, but no, it is. It's that's to give their employees a rest. It's to make, I mean, you appreciate what they do more. I mean, on Mondays, man, I sure appreciate what they do after they've been closed on Sunday. And I think there's something to that.
Yeah. I think about even our favorite place down the road, the kitchen takes off on Monday. And I don't normally think about it because obviously if I do a breakfast or a lunch, I go somewhere else. Yeah. But, man, I appreciate the fact that they give their employees and,
I asked the manager one time, hey, tell me about that, man. That's unique. And he goes, hey, I just want to take care of my employees and they just need that day of rest. And I was like, dude, that's awesome.
It's great.
And, So.
Yeah, you think about those kind of examples and, just there's something in us that knows we got to slow down. We need to rest. Your body's going to tell you that at some point. I think physically our bodies are going to, from all kinds of stress induced or, just physically how our bodies just aren't made to go 100 miles an hour all the time. So,
yeah. And it's interesting, you referenced technology, you referenced the scrolling that we do. Comer draws some of that out, some of the technological advances, even the light bulb that, like, we used to sleep on these natural cycles. And what do you say, like in the whatever, like earlier centuries, like they got an average of 11 hours of sleep a night or something like that because they were just sleeping with the cycles of the day, and then the light bulb is invented, and people aren't getting as much sleep because you can turn that on anytime. And then the clock, the invention of the clock, even before that, was like suddenly you're bound to this time piece instead of the rising and setting of the sun. And so inventions of technology, the iPhone, which you mentioned, like something that's meant to help us manage our time better ends up taking more of our time because we have access
Yes.
to everything all at once.
Yeah.
And he talks in here in this book about, what does he say? The average male spends 10,000 hours playing video games by age 21. That's something we do often to rest, but it's not very intentional rest, right? Like it's not really that Sabbath principle of rest.
No.
It's killing time, and it's just
yes, it's not rest when you see the anxiety that video games can create.
It increases my heart rate, man. It's just, it gets exciting, and it's
exciting or maddening.
Or maddening.
Yeah.
He's like, I appreciate a comment in there. He goes, you could get your bachelor's degree and your master's degree. You could memorize the New Testament. All these things you could do, or you could beat level 4 of Call of Duty. I thought that was a great statement.
Yeah. When you put it like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's great.
Going back to kind of tying some of this together, that's one of the things I appreciate about Comer's book. He unpacks a lot of what guys like Dallas Willard or Richard Foster have been writing on for years. These ideas of spiritual disciplines, and connecting that in this book to the words of Jesus. That Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. But it's really about like means to an end, not the end itself, right? Like he talks about that like. These practices of like silence and solitude, Sabbath, simplicity, slowing. He likes S's there, but they're means to an end, not the end themselves. So the end isn't silence and solitude. It's to come back to God and our true selves. It isn't Sabbath. It's a restful, grateful life of appreciation, wonder, and worship. It isn't simplicity. It's freedom and focus on what matters most. It isn't even slowing down. It's to be present to God and with the people and the moment around us. And so I really like how he draws that out, that like in anything in life, we could become legalistic about it. If the practice itself is the end in and of itself, and not the means to an end. And so I appreciated how he kind of ties that back to what you and I were even talking about with Jesus is like, man, the Sabbath is meant to provide rest for us. Yeah. It's not meant to be this end in of itself, this rule that we keep. We check a box like anything else, and we go, I'm good. So helpful practices. You talked about some on Sunday, but somebody who's going, man, I just struggle. I don't have time. I'm too busy. When I get home, I got too many things going on. I got a family I need to spend time with. I need to get projects done around the house. I'm actually just describing my own life, but like, what do you say to somebody that's just struggling to find the time to practice Sabbath principle?
Yeah, I think probably the things that you are saying are restful. It would probably be good to evaluate what you're already earmarking that time for. Yeah. So if that's hobbies, if that's time with kids, whatever it is, and then just evaluate, is that time really restful or not?
Yeah.
And so I sit down and I'm unplugging, but I'm scrolling through Facebook for an hour.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, okay, is that really restful? And if it's not, then I've already got the hour.
Right.
Then I just need to do something else with the hour.
Yeah. Comer talks about just getting your phone out of sight.
Yeah.
Out of mind. Like just get it away.
Yeah. I think that's probably most of the time when we hear stuff like this, we think, golly, I got to figure out how to carve out time. I think most of us do.
It's what we do with our time.
It's what we do with it. So if you think unplugging is watching a show on Netflix, but it's really not that restful to you, then just instead of watching the show, do something different that is truly restful.
Yeah.
That's good. I think you could do that with 100 things, and then build your way from there. But I guarantee you, we all have something that we say, hey, I go home, I sit on the couch, and I do blank.
Yeah.
Now, the question is that really restful for you? And if it's not, then you already have the time built in. Just do something different.
Do something different. Yeah. That's really good. Yeah. I mean, it really kind of boils down to taking a time inventory of like, hey, what am I doing with my
Yeah.
time? Is it restful? And yeah, because like you said, scrolling through Facebook and reading those political posts is usually we put it down and we're more stressed than when we
Yeah.
started. So
Yeah.
it's not restful, man.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And if rest is about emotional, spiritual, physical, not just I'm not doing anything physically,
Mhm.
but if it is emotional and spiritual as well, then that's probably for us recognizing, hey, I'm gonna, and it doesn't have to be every day.
Yeah.
It just has to be a rhythm somewhere
That's
in
right.
there
Yeah.
that you mark it out and say, hey, I'm gonna
Yeah.
replenish my heart, mind, and soul.
Yep.
So
Yeah. I like it, man.
yep.
It's good. That's good. Something we all struggle with. Otherwise, this book wouldn't be a bestseller. And so it's
Yeah. Yeah. It wouldn't be all throughout our Bible either.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. This is helpful, and hopefully it's helpful to folks watching. And
Yeah.
I'd love to say I have this down, but I don't have this down. It's something I always have to fight against in my own self and in our culture. It's something we got to really fight for, is that kind of rest. So
Agreed.
cool. Russell, thanks, man.
Yep. You got it.
This was fun, and hopefully if you're watching, this was helpful to you, and we can't recommend this book enough. John Mark Comer, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. If you hadn't read it, pick it up. It's got some great principles for how to rest and how to do that intentionally. So, yeah, great. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.